Okay, thank you.
All right, good to see everybody here. We're going to feel more and more like winter. It's going in now snow. Yes. All right. Just to start here, just in case things go wrong, the software that I use here is called Prezi. I love it. And I can use it for free, but I can't download it and work offline on it. So my subscription ended this past week, and I have spent an entire week trying to pay them to keep that subscription going. And it turns out it wasn't them, it was my credit card company that suspected fraud, and every time I tried to push the amount through, it would tell me it was not going through because it was suspected fraudulent. So I had to get comment, and finally, after 5 attempts at calling the security department of the credit card company, they finally got it to work. The only problem was, in the time that I was trying to get this to work, I canceled the subscription to see if that would solve the problem. And in doing so, I lost a couple of Prezis that I've been spending hours working on. Fortunately, not the one that we're doing today. But the one that we're seeing right now is a brand new one because I had to make it up because I lost that one. And so I'm in the process now of trying to get it back. And to top it off, I can't download and work offline, which is what I'm paying them to do. So now I'm still working through that process. So it's a very interesting situation, all just to say that if something goes wrong up here, it's not my fault. It's Prezi. Okay, it's the software I'm using. All right, so anyways, let's open a prayer, sir. Father, thank you again for this day. Thank you that even though it's getting cold and dark outside, that we are here together, and we are here in your presence. And we have an opportunity to open your word and to enjoy it, and to read from it, and see what you have us to learn from it, and to do so in the company of your people. And we pray, Father, as we do this, that you would reveal to us what you would want us to learn. Pray that ultimately, most of all, that you would be glorified. In whatever form that takes, that you would be glorified in what we read and what we learn today. We also pray that people here, everybody, would be edified, and we would enjoy this time spent. And we pray, Father, that in the end, we would look back and say, this was a time that you were with us. We thank you so much for what you've done for us, for having died for us. That's the whole reason why we're even here. And we pray that you would just be with us today. In Jesus' name. Well, I'll start the same way I always do, which is give you a bit of an update on what's been happening in Israel. My plan was to spend a good chunk of that time talking about Iran, and I'll bring that in. But there have been things happening in Lebanon, there's been things happening in Gaza over the week that need to be reported on, whether you've read about them or not. I figured that I might as well keep going with that, even though I talked about that last week and the week before. So let's dive into it and see what's been happening in Lebanon, particularly to start with. What you're seeing here is a concrete wall that Israel has been building. It was just discovered this week. The UN discovered it. Israel didn't seem to say anything about it, but I mean, it's hard to hide something like this. Right? But they're constructing a wall all the way across along the border with Lebanon, doing the same thing that they did with Gaza. They're walling in their country, is what they're doing. The only problem was they claimed that the wall was on the Israeli side of the border, but some of it has crossed over what's called the blue line, which is the line that the Israelis were supposed to pull back behind. And they've crossed the blue line with some of the wall, which is in the Lebanese territory, and Lebanon has filed a complaint to the UN about this. Also, on November 9th, just some days ago, last Sunday, Israel is starting to get fed up with the fact that the Lebanese army has not been able to stop Hezbollah activity. So they're pushing the Lebanese government to push its own army to go into people's homes and check their weapons. So they want to search private homes. I haven't heard any Lebanese response to that, but this is Israel saying we're done. We're done finding weapons ourselves. You should be doing it for us. And then throughout the week, just to prove that point, the IDF has used airstrikes to take out a Hezbollah weapons depots and rocket launch sites all throughout South Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, which is the eastern part of Lebanon. In one case, a weapons depot was located right near a sports and leisure center, which caused the Israelis to say they're using their own people as human shields, just like the Hamas are doing. Whether that's true or not, hard to say, but that's what they're claiming. So that's what's been happening in Lebanon. In Gaza, this is the same map I showed you last week. The yellow line is the line behind which the IDF forces have pulled back to. They used to be where the blue line was, but they pulled back to the yellow line as part of Trump's 20-point peace plan. That was what Trump was asking them to do. Which is very interesting because the peace plan hasn't really been pushed through yet. Matter of fact, Trump has been pushing the UN to pass it. And tomorrow is the vote. So tomorrow the UN will vote on whether to accept the peace plan or not. And basically the US has said there's a real human cost if you don't do it. This is, of course, Trump saying that. But that's part of the peace plan, was to pull back right behind the yellow line, which is what the Israelis have done. And they're even putting out yellow concrete blocks along that line. And they have been finding what are suspected to be Hamas terrorists crossing over that yellow line, and they're shooting them. They're killing people that are crossing that line. They are determined to not let anybody cross that line. And they warn them to stay away from the Israeli troops, stay away from the yellow line. So obviously it's the western part is where the Gazans are supposed to stay, and for the most part still being run by Hamas. That area is still being run by Hamas. During the week, 3 more deceased hostages were transferred over into Israel, and they were confirmed to be Israeli hostages. There's 3 left. And they're pushing for that to be complete. Okay, let's get these last 3 people back, and then all the hostages will be returned. Hamas, however, has claimed that they need additional teams and they need more technical support. I don't know whether they're trying to locate them or trying to get to the bodies, because some of them are supposedly been buried in the rubble. If you recall, there was a certain situation last week where there was they don't know exactly the number, but 100 to 200 Hamas fighters that were trapped in tunnels on the Israeli side of the yellow line. And they've been there all the way along. Matter of fact, they had one of those deceased hostages, and they released him. And the idea was, if we release this hostage, will you let us go? And the Israelis said no. And Trump has been pushing them hard, pushing the Israelis hard to let these terrorists who are in these tunnels out and let them cross peacefully into Gaza. And the Israelis are not permitting that. And so there's been some conversation between Netanyahu and Trump as to what to do about these terrorists. And one of the major issues, though, is there's no country that wants them. That's what it is. Usually what would happen is they would allow them to leave, but then they can't go back to Gaza or the West Bank. They have to go to a third country. That has been Egypt, and Egypt has shipped them off to other places. No country in the world is saying, we'll take those 100 to 200 people.
Oh, wait, Canada will.
Oh. No comment. All right, so that's what's happening there. Oh, by the way, one last thing. The U.S. has gathered intelligence, and this is just to show you that the Israelis are not all angels. The U.S. intelligence has discovered that in a conversation that took place last year, somehow I don't know how they discovered it recently, it was a conversation between Israeli officials who discussed how their soldiers used Palestinians to go into the tunnels that they suspected had explosives. And so rather than sending their own people in there, they were forcing Palestinians to go. So it's just to show you that it's not all roses with the Israelis. That they are more likely doing things they shouldn't be doing as well. All right, so that's what's been happening with those 2 areas. So I thought I'd jump into talking the main topic of what's happening with Iran. And this is what's been happening since the last time we had Sunday school classes back in June. If you weren't here during that time, Iran is the country behind it all. They are the ones, they are the financial, the military, the ideological power behind all of the problems that Israel is encountering with its enemies, with people around them. They are the ones funding the Hamas, the Hezbollah. They're the ones supplying weapons and so on. And the Houthis in Yemen are being supplied by Iran. The Assad government in Syria was an ally of Iran. And so all these are called Iran proxies. And they surround Israel, and they're all being supplied by Iran. Iran, as you would know, views Israel as the little Satan, and the U.S. as the big Satan. And if you ever wonder why the U.S. is backing Israel so much, it's because they know that when the little Satan falls, the big Satan is next. And so they're doing what they can to hold back all this terrorism that's starting from Iran. Iran gave its blessing to the October 7th attacks. They were the ones that said go and do it. Matter of fact, on October 26th, just 3 weeks ago, I guess, Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence agency, discovered details of an Iranian terror network behind the Jewish attacks worldwide. They believe that there's about 11,000 operatives worldwide that are doing whatever they can to attack Jews. And when you read about a lot of the Jewish attacks that have taken place, Iran is probably behind it. Now, the only thing is, with Israeli suppression of Hamas and Hezbollah, along with Assad falling in Syria, these proxies have been severely weakened. Iran has been scrambling to try to bolster them back up again. And that has been still taking place. There's been evidence that they're still supplying weapons to some of these terrorists. Their main threat, though, to Israel, as we discovered last June, is their nuclear program. One of the main goals of Iran is the destruction of Israel. That's one of their main goals. And not surprisingly, that's the main goal of the terrorists that are attacking Israel, is the destruction of Israel. And so it was discovered in June that the Iranians were on the verge of having enough enriched uranium to make as many as 9 to 11 nuclear weapons, whatever form that would take. And that was the reason why, in June, the Israelis bombed Iran. And this is a map of the areas that they bombed. And a lot of those are nuclear facilities, either enrichment plants or research plants. That's what they hit all around Iran. And this was a shock to Iran. They did not expect that. And then they asked the U.S., please help us, because there are some of these nuclear plants that they couldn't destroy completely with their own weapons. The U.S. had the technology to do the damage. And Fordo, in particular, was the one that was buried deep underground, and they needed some really strong, powerful bombs. And Trump listened. And he sent in his planes and bombed 3 different locations in Iran in June. So this was what happened in June. The only repercussions that came from that, Iran immediately sent a whole pile of rockets over at Israel, which most of them got shot down. And that's all that's been taking place. It's been quiet ever since. But there's evidence showing that Iran is rebuilding its nuclear facilities. As a matter of fact, there is a lot of belief now that the facilities were not as destroyed as once believed. As a matter of fact, Trump was very convinced it's over. They're done. They're years, we put them years behind. And there's a lot of evidence to show it's not as bad as, not as destroyed as it sounds. And so, matter of fact, they're rebuilding their nuclear facilities, they're building newer ones, and with Russia and China support. As a matter of fact, Russia and China are pledging to supply them with more rockets they can use against Israel. So, all along, though, since June, there's been some diplomatic fighting between Iran and the UN. Up until June, what Iran was agreeing to do was to allow the UN inspectors to come in and take a look at all their nuclear facilities and to see how close they are to enriching uranium. By the way, the Iranians have denied desiring to build nuclear weapons, but they've enriched uranium to such a point that it's useless for peace purposes. The only purpose to having uranium enriched to the point they have is to build a weapon, and yet they're saying we're not building it. So that's what they're saying. But the diplomatic breakdown has been that Iran has said that we no longer are going to allow UN inspectors to come into our country. They were willing to do it because of sanctions. The U.S. had some severe sanctions against the Iranians, and it was crippling. And so they agreed, all right, if you ease off on the sanctions, we'll let UN inspectors come in. Well, now, despite those sanctions, they still refuse, mainly because they're blaming the UN inspectors for giving Israel justification for attacking, because they're giving them information about what's going on. So the UN has reimposed sanctions on Iran for refusing to let them in. And Iran has said, you are not going to stop us from enriching uranium. We're going to do it, whether you like it or not. On October 29th, the UN Nuclear Watchdog, as they're called, this is the organization that's part of the UN that's inspecting all these sites. They stated that there's no evidence that Iran is enriching uranium at this point, but there's movement at these nuclear sites, meaning they're probably cleaning them up, and they're rebuilding. Then on November 9th, just a week ago, just last Sunday, there was a report that Iran was experiencing a severe drought. It was worse than 60 years, they said. And they're concerned that it's going to lead to potential unrest. It also could have an impact on its nuclear program. And they've even been toying with the idea of abandoning Iran, of evacuating it, because it's so bad. And I'm not sure today whether it's still bad. I know that a couple of days ago it was still really bad. They have a lot of water shortages. They're telling their people to cut back on the water use and so on. And then also last Sunday, they believe that because Iran is showing some activity at its nuclear sites, that another Israeli-Iran war is inevitable. I mean, I think we could have expected that anyways. I mean, it's not going to end. So they think that it's going to happen at some point, probably sometime soon. The New York Times, as a matter of fact, reported that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium, which is believed to be enough to make a boat, 11 nuclear weapons, is either buried under the rubble, which is what Iran claims, or it's been transplanted to a secret site, which is what Israel believes. So who's true, who's right? That's probably irrelevant, because if Israel believes it exists somewhere, they'll go after it. Let's see what else I'm going here. The UN has said that they need to get their inspectors in there. They said it is long overdue and critical that it be done as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, Iran's project director has stated that Tehran has greatly increased its missile production, and it's getting these missiles as well from China and Russia. And it plans to have a system that will launch 2,000 missiles at once. As of this point, the best they've ever done was launch 500 missiles over a 12-day period. They want to be able to launch 2,000 in one shot. And that will really tax Israel's Iron Dome system. So that's the direction they're going. But I found it rather interesting with Russian and China support. I mean, we're looking at end times here. This is end times like stuff, right? These are enemies proven to be of Israel, at least certainly Russia. All right, so that's what happened. So that's what's been happening in Iran since last June. I've got a little bit of time left. I'm going to go into just a couple more places, because next week I wanted to focus on the West Bank. The West Bank has been a powder keg over the past number of weeks, and it's been getting worse, almost exponentially. So that's something that I want to come into on my last week, which is next week. So one of the nations that came into the news not that long ago was Qatar. Qatar is that little tiny nation right here in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf. And just to give you a zoomed out view of where they are. Matter of fact, Qatar is not actually the way to pronounce it. It's actually Qatar. I learned that. I heard all kinds of reports reporters talking about Qatar. What's Qatar? No, actually it's pronounced Qatar. So Qatar has been functioning as one of the primary mediators between Israel and Hamas. They've been out front trying to stop this war. And it's also a major U.S. ally in the Middle East. But on September 9th, the IDF conducted an airstrike on Doha, which is the capital of Qatar. And they were targeting a meeting of Hamas leadership. Now this is a neutral country that's trying to stop the war. They had nothing against Israel at all, and Israel attacked. They didn't kill any major leaders, but they killed 6 lower-level Hamas members that were there. The Qatari Prime Minister called the Israeli attack state terrorism and a criminal assault. I don't like it. They didn't do anything against Israel there. But Israel responded with, if you don't deal with Hamas being sheltered in your country, you will. And so this is like what I was saying last week. They are being proactively defensive. Whether Hamas working within the country, and a lot of these countries have Hamas working in them. I think it's because they're neutral. They're not hostile against either the Israelis or the Hamas. So it's hard to say. I think they can be, but the question was, can they be trusted? I think they can be because they haven't really proven to be enemies of Israel. They just happen to have the enemies of Israel housed within their country, which is their right to allow to happen. So, but Israel is determined that they're going to take out Hamas, and that's one of the early findings. All right, the last place I wanted to jump into here was Yemen. What was happening in Yemen? If you recall, Yemen is this nation south of Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And they happen to be the nation that is right where this Bab el-Mandeb Strait is. It's the thinnest, narrowest strait in the entire route from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea until you get to the Suez Canal. And so this is an area where ships are going to come really, really close together. And what the Houthis were doing, and the Houthis basically are occupying the western part of Yemen, including the capital in Sana'a. And they are rebels. And the Yemeni government and the Yemeni army can't knock them out. They're too powerful. And they're a proxy of Iran, so they're getting a lot of weapons from Iran. And what they were doing was they were attacking shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, particularly ships that were supplying Israel. And they were doing this to support the Hamas and the Hezbollah. And as long as there was a war on, that's what they were doing. And they were also launching almost daily rockets and drones over into Israel. And for the most part, some of those rockets fell short. Most of them got shot down by Israeli anti-defense, defense with the anti-rocket system. Only 2 really landed in Israel. One landed at the airport at Tel Aviv and injured somebody, but didn't kill anybody. And then there was also one that landed at the very southern part of Israel, in Eilat, which is the southern city in Israel. They're the only 2 times that's actually got hit by the Houthis. They've been occupying that part of Yemen, by the way, since 2015. So they've been in Yemen for 10 years doing what they're doing. Israel has conducted many airstrikes against them. They've sent their planes down, and they've hit a lot of places in Sana'a and Hodeida, which is their port, and where their main forces are concentrated. And The U.S. has launched missile attacks at them as well, and they've hit missile sites, fuel depots, ports, power plants, all kinds of infrastructure to try to stop the Houthis from launching their rockets. On November 10th, just 6 days ago, the Houthis said that they're going to stop their attacks because of the ceasefire that's taking place between Gaza and Israel. And but they said, and they're also going to stop hitting shipping in the Red Sea. But they said that if Israel resumes its attacks on Hamas, they're going to resume their attacks with the rockets. So they'll pick it right back up again. And as a matter of fact, today I read that the UN called for its member states, which is 100 some odd countries around the world, to beef up an arms embargo against the Houthis. In other words, stop allowing weapons to get to the Houthis. They need to, there's a lot of weapons that have been smuggled in. They need to stop doing that. So they're calling on all the nations that are in the UN to watch for this. All right, so that was the area that I wanted to get to for this week. I don't know if anybody had any questions. Remember, you can always interrupt. Anytime. Just say something if you got something that you're aware of. All right, next week, again, what I want to do is talk about the West Bank, because that is quite a power game right now.
So what is the Houthis' motivation that 6 days ago they decided to stop sending rockets when the ceasefire's been in play for much longer than that?
Good question. It might have been that was when they made it public.
Okay.
They might have already been doing it prior to that. They finally just made it public. I don't know. That's my opinion. Yeah, the motivation, I think, is they're. I think they're trying to show how much they're in alignment with Hamas and Hezbollah. You know, so if they're if there's potential peace, then they'll also go use it. That's my thinking. They're also driven by Iran, so Iran might have just told them to stop for now. So that's what I say. Okay. Well, let's switch over if President wants to. Let's find out where I am. No, I got it. There it is. Okay, so we'll switch over to the study of David. See where we're at here. We're actually starting in 2 Samuel chapter 18. 2 Samuel 18, and I'll set it up again to make sure everybody's caught up to date on this. What we currently are at here, at this point, 2 Samuel 18, David is in Mahanaim, which is right up in the upper right corner. I've zoomed in a little bit too much here. Hopefully you can picture where everything is. You can see the Jordan River right here, and Jerusalem is down here, and Mahanaim is up in here. And David, he's about 62 years old. When he discovered that his son Absalom was rising up against him to try to take the kingdom, he realized that he better leave Jerusalem for a bunch of reasons. One of which is he didn't want Jerusalem destroyed, but also he felt that this is more than likely, I wouldn't be surprised he's stepping back, trying to protect himself there. But he left Jerusalem and he parked himself on the western side of the Jordan River, waiting on word as to what to do. And then spy network let him know that Absalom is coming, and he's bringing his men, and he wants to kill you. Cross over the river and go. So David crossed over the river and then went up to Mahanaim, which was a walled city, and one that actually received him, which is very strange because it's in Yemen. It wasn't that long ago that Yemen was a country he crushed and did potential atrocities against him. But for some reason, he had support from the people of Mahanaim. So that's where he is. And then at this point, if you read in verse 25 of the previous chapter, chapter 17, verse 25, actually verse 24, David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. So now, at this point, in chapter 18, verse 1, Absalom has crossed the river. We don't know if it's the green line that's there. I mean, that's all speculation. But more than likely, he is on the eastern side of the Jordan River at this point, and just outside of Mahanaim, just to the west of it. Sorry, he's on the west. It's on the eastern side of Jordan, to the west of Mahanaim, waiting. It's believed, if you believe Josephus, David had about 4,000 men, and Absalom was believed to have at least 20,000. 20,000 is a number that comes up in Scripture as well. So about 5 times as many. Certainly much more than what David has. And the key point is this. Absalom wants to kill his father so that he can take over the kingdom. He's got nobody standing in his way. David wants to protect Absalom and preserve him and keep him safe. So this is the difference. And what that means is the tactics of war for both of these sides are completely different in terms of how they're going to conduct this war. Well, where we're at, I can find my thing here. I'm going to zoom in here. We're at civil war again. The first time that the civil war took place was after Saul was killed, and his son Ishbosheth was king of the northern tribes. And David was king of Judah. He had been crowned king of Judah, hadn't been crowned king of Israel yet. He was in Hebron, that was his capital, hadn't captured Jerusalem yet. Ishbosheth, interestingly enough, used Mahanaim as his capital. And so Mahanaim was backing Ishbosheth. But then now, Mahanaim is backing David, which is rather interesting. But this is now another civil war against, now in this case, it's against his own son. So, just to move on here, we know from the previous chapter that Absalom and his forces have crossed over and are now just probably outside of Mahanaim in the land of Gilead. And they are waiting to fight. That's what's happening. So if I give you another map here, this again gives you some idea. We're up in here now, and Mahanaim, David, somewhere in this area, Absalom, and they're going to fight in the forest of Ephraim. You'll see there's a question mark there. We don't know for sure where the forest of Ephraim is, but it's probably in that area. Just to give you a modern version of it, I looked it up. I want to find out, does the forest of Ephraim still exist? No. Apparently, the Romans and the Ottoman Turks deforested the whole area during their time in that area. So it said, chop all the trees down. Prior to that, though, there apparently was a lot of trees there. And it was a forest. Now it's like little shrubs, things like that. That's what exists today. All right, but no doubt by this point, Absalom had taken Hushai's advice. And Hushai, remember, is David's spy in the Absalom's government. And he was trying to thwart Ahithophel's advice, and he did. And now he's probably become Absalom's main advisor, and he's pro-David. So this is a very dangerous situation for Hushai. But Hushai advised him, go out into all the countryside, gather as many people as you can, and then go after David. And it sure seems obvious the reason why he said that was to give David time to get away. But the downfall of that is, Absalom's got a lot of men now. And so he's managed to collect a lot of people from around the nation, and they're ready to fight David. Now, this is part of the problem. All right, so now, before the rebellion begins, one last thing to read before we get to 2 Samuel 18, and that's 2 Samuel 17, verse 25. And it says, Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab. Try not to get lost in the next number of words here. Which Absalom was a man's son, whose name was Ithra, an Israelite, who went in to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. Wow, what does that mean? That's a lot of people involved here. So I'm going to try to sort all that out to try to figure out what exactly is happening here. All right, so what we know is that Absalom chose Amasa to be his captain of the host. Remember, captain of the host is the head military soldier. He's the top guy in the military. And the interesting thing about this is that Amasa happens to be, bring it in here, he happens to be Absalom's cousin. He's the son of David's sister. If you recall, David's got a lot of brothers. Remember, he was the youngest of all those brothers that were being interviewed to find out who was going to be the next king of Israel. He also had two sisters, Zeruiah, and now we see Abigail. These are his two sisters. We read about that in 1 Chronicles. Joab, who was David's captain of the host, was another cousin of Absalom through David's sister Zeruiah. And he was being replaced by Amasa. Well, let me give you a genealogy here. This might be a little easier to see it. Okay, so this is Jesse, David's father, all his brothers, two sisters right here. Zeruiah had 3 sons. Abishai, Joab, Asahel. Asahel was actually killed a long time before this by Abner. So he's out of the picture. But these two men, Joab and Abishai, are major generals in David's army. And David's other sister Abigail had a son, Amasa. So Amasa and Joab actually are cousins. And of course, David had a son, Absalom. So they're all cousins of each other. And so it's rather interesting that he chose Amasa to be his captain of the host because of the way it's worded in verse 25. All right, so if you read it, very beginning of verse 25 again, Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab. Now, it makes you read into that a bit. Instead of Joab. What exactly does that mean? Whose side is Joab on here? Is he on David's side? Was he on Absalom's side and Absalom rejected him? From that verse, it's a little hard to see. But just to give you Joab's credentials here, he would have been the natural choice if given the option to be captain of Absalom's army. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll stop for a second and see if the background that you have now, who you know Joab is. Any idea why he would be the natural choice? To be Absalom's captain of the host.
Could he be because he's going to he'll expect him to spy on David?
Okay, potentially. Yeah, that's a good point. That's all speculation, but that's possible.
Was he the oldest?
He wasn't the oldest of the three brothers, which is interesting. We'll look at that actually in a while, because he ends up giving his command over to Abishai, which is interesting because my understanding, I think, Abishai, I think actually was the older brother. I'm not sure. Check into that. What do you know about Joab? What do you know about his relationship with David? Here we go. Okay. First one I'd say is he has experience. Okay, he's been David's captain of the host for years. So he knows what he's doing. He also knew David. So he would have known David's tactics, which is why it's a good point that it could be maybe he spy on. And he would have known what information passed on to Absalom. And his relationship with David was always strained. And so this could give a good reason why Joab might choose to switch sides. But to be honest, I don't think that's what's been happening here. I don't think that's what happened. Verse 25 seems to imply that Joab was running for the position of Absalom's captain of the host. But he was either rejected by Absalom, if that was the case, or in fact he had chosen to follow David. And this is my thinking. I think that's what really happened. David, later on, you're going to read about it in just 18 verse 2, that he puts a third of his army under Joab, which means Joab is with David. So I think the way that this verse was worded in verse 25, when it says there that he made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab, is what he was basically saying was Joab left with David. There's a whole pile of men who are now standing around going, our major general is gone. So instead of Joab, Absalom put Amasa in place. I think that's the idea. Now that Joab's gone, all right, I'm going to put Amasa in place of what Joab used to be, which is captain of the host. So I think that was what was really taking place here.
I think he must have suspected that Joab was loyal, because it says in verse 14 that Joab killed him with 3 darts.
Right. Yeah, there you go. So you can see there can't be any connection. Yeah, it's a good point. All right, so David's main goal. This is what he's doing right now in Mahanaim. He's preparing his forces for battle. And that's what we get to in chapter 18. So let's read chapter 18. These first few verses here. And in the King James Version, it says, David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Remember, the estimation is he might have had about 4,000 men. So he could put captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of his brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. They're both sons of Zeruiah. And a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite, who was really the head head of David's bodyguard. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. So even though I've given a third, I'm going with you into battle. This is an interesting response by his people. Verse 3, but the people answered, thou shalt not go forth. For if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou sendest aid from the city. Don't come with us, send us aid. And the king said unto them, what seemeth to you best, I will do. All right, I'll stay behind. And the king stood beside the gate, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. Everybody heard him say, do not hurt my son. Verse 6. So the people went out into the field against Israel. The battle was in the forest of Ephraim. When the people of Israel were slain, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there were a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men, which means obviously Absalom had at least 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. There's a lot to read into this. So let's take a look at what this is saying. All right, so what did David do in preparing his forces? He numbered the people who were with him. And he sent captains over thousands and captains over hundreds. Remember, this is a ragtag group of people that he gathered together. He's got his own men who were the main force behind his army. But he didn't leave Jerusalem with 4,000 people. Okay, so we got to figure out where these people come from. We'll take a look at that in a second. Josephus reported that David had about 4,000 men, and Absalom had probably about 20,000 men. So where did these men come from? More than likely, the men that joined David, a good number of them came from Jerusalem, would have picked up men along the way, more than likely on the way to Mahanaim. And then when he got to Mahanaim, there would have been people that come. So the one thing about this is that David was really good at that. Right? If you recall his first exile, when he went into exile from Saul, you remember his wife Michal, orchestrated him leaving and then lied about him being in the room. He was alone at the beginning of that exile. 4 years later, he had his family with him, he had wives, he had children, but he had a lot of supporters. He was really good at being able to draw people to himself. He must have been charismatic enough to do that. And this is just one of those areas where I believe that David was a type of Christ. If you've ever heard of various men throughout Scripture that are types of Christ, they resemble Jesus in a lot of ways. I think this is one of those areas. Because Jesus naturally drew people to himself. Right? He drew children to him. Children just naturally flocked to him. Right? And he was charismatic enough to draw people to him. And so I think this is what David had as well. All right, so David, what did he do? He took these men, 4,000 or so men, and divided them into three parts. Now, I don't know how you take 4,000 and divide by 3. I'm a math teacher, and that's a tough one to do. It must have been like, anyway, 1/3 were commanded by each of those men. Okay, David's preparation. Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me back up here. David's preparation for battle ordered on the emotional. That's what we read about in these verses. There's a lot of emotion in here that we see. All right, so the three forces. By the way, let me back up one step. The three men that David gave his army to, Joab and Abishai, well, they're men that have been with David for a while. Ittai, the Hittite, was the third one. It's interesting that he was the one that David gave power to because, first off, he's from Gath. But he's been with David for a while as well. And he was kind of the head of David's bodyguard. And if you recall, going back to chapter 15, when David first left Jerusalem, and we ended up spending an entire chapter talking about all the people that David talked to on the way out of Jerusalem. One of the people he talked to was Ittai, and he told Ittai, "Go back. You're not an Israelite. You're putting yourself in danger by coming with me." And Ittai said, "I'm going with you." And David said, "All right, come with me." Well, that showed us a serious devotion that he had. And it also shows David's level of trust in him by giving a third of his army to his man from Gath. So these three men were definitely loyal to David, even if there were some kickback sometimes with him. All right, so once again, his preparations bordered on the emotional. This is what he said. He said, "Oh man, you're not going alone. I will go forth with you myself also. I am coming with you. I'm not going to let you go out and fight. I'm going to show you my example." That's what he wanted to do. And this was not well received by his men. They did not like that idea at all. They recognized David's worth and his value to the soldiers. And they implored him, "Stay at Mahanaim. Do not go with us." And they gave a bunch of reasons. And they had to try to convince him not to come. All right, well, the main reason that they said was that, you're the only man considered to be a prize. I mean, if we die, it doesn't matter, right? So that's in verse 3. People answered, "Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. If Absalom's men kill us, who cares?" That's the whole point. "But thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that you stay." All right, well, where have you heard the term that David was worth 10,000? David had slain his 10,000. Saul had slain his 1,000. It's interesting that they used the term 10,000. That David was on his own to kill 10,000. His men are saying here, "You're worth 10,000. And so therefore, you cannot be captured, you can't be killed in battle. And because you're worth so much, right? Ahithophel actually agreed. Ahithophel, Absalom's counselor. Because if you turn back just for a second to chapter 17 and verse 2, this is Ahithophel's advice to Absalom, which was to go kill David. But in verse 2 it says, "And Ahithophel, I will come upon David while he's weary and weak-handed, and will make him afraid, and all the people who are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only." So that was a battle tactic. We're gonna do everything we can to find David and kill him. You cut off the head of the snake, and that army will fall to pieces. And his men knew this. His men saw this. You can't come with us. If you get killed, we will fall to pieces. It will not be pretty. Josephus worded it this way. He said, David's men, this is there's men explaining, "If we be conquered when you're with us, we have lost all good hopes of recovering ourselves. We'll fall to pieces. But if we should be beaten in one part of our army, say 1/3 falls, the other parts may retire to him. They can retreat back to David, and may thereby prepare a greater force, while the enemy will naturally suppose that he has another army with him." Basically saying that if 1/3 of the army gets defeated, we can back up to David, regroup, and we can form an army that was even more powerful than what Absalom was expecting. So this is what Josephus says was the reason. All right. Well, his men didn't stop there. They kept trying to convince him to stay. I bet you he kept saying, "No, I'm coming with him. No, I'm coming with him. No, I'm coming with him." They further explained that the enemy would have no concern for anyone else, even if David's men fled or half of them died. All right. He said, "But now you are worth 10,000. All right. Well, what they were doing, they were playing with his heartstrings. They were saying that you are worth the 10,000 that you were once claimed to be able to kill. And so he finally relented. He finally said, "All right, I'm going to stop there." But this is what he said, and I found this very interesting. How David worded it. He saw the wisdom in their reasoning, and this is what he said: "What seemeth to you best, I will do." So, if you think about it, we will ask you this: how is this a good characteristic of a leader?
So last time he didn't go to war, he certainly got into trouble, didn't he?
True. Yeah.
That had to be on the back.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it would be. But if you think about what he's saying here, he says, "All right, what seemeth to you best, I'll do." This is the king. And he's saying, "Well, what you're saying seems best, I'll do it." How is that a good characteristic of a leader?
It shows that he has respect for his men.
There you go, right? He had tremendous respect for the common soldier that was saying these things. Right? He was saying basically, you know what? I had a thought in mind that I thought was best. You came up with something better. I'm going to go with what you're saying. That's a great characteristic of a leader. Of listening to the subordinates and saying, you know what, you're right. I'm going to go with what you're saying. Rather than saying stubbornly and just saying pridefully, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I don't care what you say, even though what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. We're going to do what I'm doing. Right? And so I saw this as a characteristic of David that's abnormal. I mean, this is a man that could have easily just said, I'm going to do what I want to do. So, I mean, even in teaching, I find this in teaching. Like, I get the greatest respect from kids whenever a kid says something that's contrary to what I've been saying, and it makes more sense. So then I'll say, oh, you're right. And you can see it in their face. Oh. You know what I mean? And guess what? A new respect for the leader takes place there. These men probably just, their respect doubled for David for having said this.
Well, that just actually shows a whole different managing style, where
Yeah.
you're empowering your people who are under you,
Right.
and not needing to be an authoritarian type of a leader,
Right, right.
which is a much nicer kind of guy to work for.
Well, but that's it. And I mean, you can probably see the opposite of Absalom. A lot of what Absalom's doing, he's following his advisors very closely, and he's just doing what he wants to do. You know, and so I think there's a real contrast there. So you're right. It is a good managerial style that we're seeing here. So,
David, I think that's
yes.
another thing, if you don't, as a leader, if you don't listen to subordinates, after a while, they stop offering, and when they are quite convinced that the authoritarian leader is going to make a mistake,
Right.
they just let it make it.
Sports teams do that, right? I mean, as soon as you see players losing respect for the coach, and the coach is, we're doing this. Well, you know, there might be a better way of doing it. No, we're doing it my way. Usually within a short period of time, that coach is fired.
Cause some problems as well.
Yeah,
They don't listen to your.
that's right. Cindy?
The definition of submission. What seems to you best, I will do,
Yeah. Yeah, there you go, right?
right?
So that's a.
But it requires a very healthy relationship.
Yes, and a lot of humility as well, right? To be able to submit like that.
Yeah.
It's a good point. All right. So where are we at? We've reached that point where these men are now starting to walk out of the city. Okay, so we've reached verse 5. I guess verse 4. Second half of verse 4. As David stood by the gate of Mahanaim, his soldiers passed by in the groups of hundreds of thousands that he designated. His final instructions, which were heard by everybody, supposedly around him, were these. Deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. It was made very clear, do not hurt my son. All right, and I like the way that Matthew Henry put it. Matthew Henry put it this way. Absalom would have David only smitten. David would have Absalom only spared. And again, that's the difference in what's happening in the Civil War. Absalom wanted David dead. David wanted Absalom to stay alive. And that would change the way things are going. Well, David's command revealed something here. He still loved Absalom, despite the fact that he was showing the worst of treachery. What's the worst treachery that a son can have against his father? Trying to kill him. Right? And so he still loved him. And instructions were explicit and expressed publicly, and no man had an excuse. Right? Everyone knew before the battle began that Absalom was not to be harmed. So this was made very, very clear. And so David's soldiers left Mahanaim, and they went north into the forest of Ephraim to meet with the army of Absalom. That's where they're going. And so just to give you that view here, once again, that was the same map I showed you before, forest of Ephraim, where the green arrow meets the red arrow. That's where the battle is supposedly beginning, where there were once trees in this forest. All right? And Matthew Henry actually suggested that David's men desired to meet Absalom's men at a distance away from Mahanaim because they wanted to spare Mahanaim from having any issues with battle. So that's why it was in the forest rather than the city. more than likely it was that site was dictated by David's men. I wouldn't be surprised. They probably came out far away from Mahanaim and said, "Come to us," and they probably came and fought in that area. All right, so actually, this is probably a great place to stop, because at that point, what we'll do next week is we'll take a look at what the description was of the victory that David's men had, and it was very interesting the way it was worded in Scripture here as to what might have happened to Absalom's men. So we'll take a look at that next week, and then see what the aftermath of all of this is. All right, so probably a great time to stop. Thanks very much. One more week to go, and then Pastor Dave's back on with Revelation. So, all right, thanks everybody.